Oh man, there is a really pretty Mississippi kite flying right there. Oh, he's so cool. Yeah, this is gonna be one of those ADHD kind of episodes. What's up, my people? Welcome back to the channel. Happy day, whatever day it is that you are watching this. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I am thoroughly excited that you've come back by the studio to talk about what we're talking about today, to see what's going on, and to do all of the things that we do here at Father's Lion Studio. Yeah, thank you for coming by. I am more and more encouraged by the community that is forming in and around the studio, so thank you for being a part of that. I'm probably going to scratch my nose several times today because I've been dealing with a little bit of a chest cold and it makes my nose itch, and it's not great. And there's a bumblebee. Yeah, this is gonna be one of those ADHD kind of episodes. It's fine, it's fine, it's good. But it is a great day. Before we jump into today's topic, how to choose your patron saint, I want to talk about just a little change that I want to make to the intro part of these videos. You know, I talk a lot about what's going on in the studio, the different things that I'm working on, different opportunities that are coming around, and I'm going to keep doing that. But as I've said before, as an artist, a lot of times it's just the same song and dance. Sit in the studio, make the art. That's it. Not a whole lot to update. However, I've been thinking about this a lot, and one of the things I want to talk about, and this is not my own idea, I'm not the Einstein, definitely not the Einstein of YouTube videos, but the idea came from Keith Nestor in an interview he did with Matt Fradd recently, and I really liked his idea, and so I kind of want to piggyback off of that and champion that a little bit and do exactly what he was talking about. So this little segment at the beginning of the videos, if I'm not talking about tiny airplane, that's a really little airplane. If I don't have some specific updates to talk about from the studio, I want to talk about what I'm listening to in the studio. So I think I might title this little segment, What's Playing in the Studio. And this week, I've been listening to a lot of Joe Heschmeyer. If you are not aware of Joe Heschmeyer, he is a Catholic apologist. He comes from a lawyer background. I love the way he explains the faith. He's just really good at it. Really good at it. Which, you know, is why he works for Catholic Answers, and it's why his channel is very popular, and it's why he's a great defender of the faith. He's really good at it. And especially this week, my favorite video that I've done, that I've listened to while working on an icon. That's the thing, when I'm working on an icon, I'm either listening to music of some kind or some form of apologetics, some form of teaching on the faith. I just love that stuff. I love listening to other people talk about why Catholicism is good and beautiful and true. So when I'm painting, I'm usually listening to one of those two things, music or apologetics. And I've been listening to a lot of Joe Heschmeyer this week. And my favorite video that he did is his explanation of why, looking at both scripture and tradition, why Marian devotion is not pagan. And he's responding to Gavin Ortland's video about why Gavin Ortland, a Protestant pastor, thinks it is pagan. And Joe Heschmeyer does a fantastic job of just obliterating those arguments. So if you don't know who he is, go check out his channel. If you do know who he is, but you want to listen and learn more about Marian devotion, that video is up there at the top of the things that I've enjoyed listening to this week. So that's what's playing in the studio this week. But let's jump into the topic of today, how to choose your patron saint. And I will tell you, among many of the questions that I get as an iconographer, one of the questions I get most often is, how do I even choose? Ran out of memory. Okay, so the question I get asked most often is, how do I even choose a patron saint? What is a patron saint for? And I think I get this question in part because as an iconographer, I spend a lot of time sitting with the saints. So it's a natural question, and it's one I grappled with when I converted into the church. Like, how do you choose? What is it for? What's the purpose? I don't even know what a patron saint is. And that was one of the questions that hit me just right in the face as we were preparing to come into the Catholic Church. Pause for car. And I want to address both of those questions. Why do we have patron saints? What is their purpose? And how do I choose one? So this is my patron saint. This is St. Patrick. This is an early icon that I wrote when I was first learning the craft. And I wrote it because I wanted an icon of my patron saint in my studio. I'll tell you, it's not a very good icon. I had, and still have, a lot to learn when it comes to the writing of icons. And this one I did in watercolor. Has some imitation gold leaf for the halo. It's a fine, it's a fine icon. It's not great, but it's full of memories, and that's what I appreciate. But St. Patrick is my patron saint, and first I want to address that question. Why do we even have patron saints? What are their purpose? Why are we blessed to choose a patron saint as we go through conversion or as we go through confirmation? Either of those things, whether you're cradle or convert. And I would answer the question this way. Our patron saint is first and foremost that person that we are asking to intercede on our behalf all day, every day, for the rest of our lives. That's the first part. So think of it, when you're choosing a patron saint, think of a person that you would particularly like to have pray for you all day, every day, before the throne of God. Now, that said, yes, the Blessed Mother, obviously, she intercedes for us all day, every day. But there's also other family members, right? Think of them as like brothers and sisters. And it's one of the things about Protestants that I find a touch frustrating, because you'll get the whole, well, I don't need saints to pray for me. I don't need Mary to pray for me. I can just pray to Jesus. Sure, that's true. But that's a lot like saying, hey, Jesus, I love you, but I don't want anything to do with your family. I see that as problematic. So first and foremost, a patron saint is somebody that's going to pray for you all day, every day. But just as important, when you choose a patron saint, you are choosing your guide on the spiritual journey. Who is a person that you would be willing to follow in the journey of becoming more spiritually attuned to the kingdom of heaven? Think of it similarly to Virgil and Dante. When Dante writes the Divine Comedy, he walks through hell, purgatory, and heaven, and he does so with a guide. And that guide is Virgil, because Virgil was somebody that Dante highly regarded as both a poet and a person of some moral certitude. And that's very much what we're trying to do when we're choosing a patron saint. We're picking somebody that we admire and want to follow as we go on this great pilgrim's progress, as Bunyan said. That's another great example. That book is full of spiritual guides, and you could think of them also when you're thinking about how to choose a patron saint. And I don't mean that as like people to pick as a patron saint. I mean as an example of how our patrons guide us on the spiritual journey. And so those are the two things that are most important when you're choosing your patron saint. Who is somebody that you admire, that you want to be your guide, and who is somebody that their prayers seem of great value to you. Now, my wife asked me to make sure I make this point. She's right, and it's a very, very good point to make. She is a brilliant woman, and I'm going to make sure to make this point. When you choose your patron saint, please take the pressure off of, I have to pick the right patron saint. I have to have the right guide. I have to do this the right way. Don't do any of that unnecessary worrying. Just because you have a patron saint does not mean you cannot be connected to or devoted to other members of God's family. Oh. bumblebee just flew over my head. God's family is humongous. And, whoa, a blue swallowtail butterfly. Told you, ADHD episode. Okay. God's family is huge. And St. Patrick is my first and foremost biggest, closest brother. But there are, I don't want to sound boastful, so I'm not going to do the number. There is a large group of saints to whom I seek intercession every single day. St. Patrick is at the head of that list. But there are other saints to whom I have a devotion. So just because you pick a patron saint doesn't mean you can't be close to other members of God's family. So take the pressure off of yourself. Just because you have a patron saint who you feel great devotion for now doesn't mean you won't have a great devotion for other saints later. It's just you're picking the person to whom, if no one else, you have a devotion and whom you are seeking intercession from. So please take the pressure off. Yes, you have a patron saint. Yes, they're really important. Yes, they're really beautiful. But you can have devotions to other saints and the intercession of other saints. And it's all good and it's all wonderful. So please don't feel like you have to get it right. Okay, so all of that said, how do you choose a patron saint? And there are lots of different ways, and there are different levels, different facets, right? There are different ways that you can do this. The easiest way is birthdays. You know, what saints are there on your birthday? That's an option. That's the surface level, right? Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly fine. There's vocation. That's kind of the next level. Who is a saint that shares your vocation? You know, who's the patron saint of police officers or teachers or pilots or priests? Or there's a patron saint for every occupation. Well, except for the sinful ones. We don't have those. Yes, there are sinful occupations. Okay, anyways, not the point. If you want to choose a patron saint based on your occupation, great. Do that. Nothing wrong with that. The deeper level that I try to recommend people to pursue, not that it's necessarily better, but soup with salt is richer. And I would suggest to you that at this deeper level, you will find a richer, more meaningful experience if you go about choosing your patron saint in this way. Who is a patron saint whose life is something that you want to imitate? Or whose life mirrors very much your own story. So part of this is you have to know your story. You have to sit down with Jesus and look at the story of your life and figure out what kind of story it is. Because every life is and has a story. So what is your story? What is it God's calling you to do? What is it God's calling you to walk through? You know, as an example, my wife could have looked at the different saints who wrestled with chronic pain. That's a part of her story. And it's a part of her story that's not going anywhere. At least not for the foreseeable future. And that is a suffering that God has asked her to bear. And she could have done patron saint by birthday. She could have done patron saint by occupation. But she started looking at this particular road that God has asked her to walk on, and she looked at different saints who dealt with chronic pain. So that's the deeper, richer level that I would encourage people to look at. What is it that God's calling you to walk through? What is the story of your life, and who, as a saint, walked a similar road? You know, like, I'll give you an example. You could think of St. Joan of Arc, and there goes the kite again. He literally just flew right over me. Thankfully, he didn't poop in my face. So take St. Joan of Arc as an example. You could look at her as a, you know, a patron saint of soldiers and leaders in combat and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. However, one of the things that's unique about Saint Joan of Arc is that she was called by God to walk into situations that were not common for women of her time to walk into. So you could look at that story as someone from outside of the norm walking into situations where they were not welcome to do the work of the kingdom. Maybe that's your story. Maybe you've been invited into a part of the world where your work requires you to be a voice that's different than the secular, worldly, broken voice. Maybe you're called to be different, and St. Joan of Arc is a good example of that. So hopefully you see what I mean by look at your patron saint as you're trying to make a choice. Like, what is it that God's walking you through? Now, some of that I realize is directed really more towards converts. Grown men and women who are coming into the church and have the ability to look at the story of their life, and they're able to say, okay, this is the story. You know, I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 30s, this is the story I'm walking through, and that helps me connect to a patron saint. So what do you do if you're a parent and your kids are about to go through confirmation and they're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, and it's hard to know what their story is? It's hard to know what God's called them to. To that, I would say, don't necessarily go with occupation or birth date. Again, nothing wrong with that. But look at who they are. What are the things about your kids that are uniquely them? My son is a joy bringer. Wherever he goes, he brings joy. So he and I might sit down together and look at who are the saints that were known for their joy. And we might make a list of those saints. You know, my daughter, at the age of 4, knew in her heart that the only thing she wants to be is a mom. That is her highest desire, and that has stuck with her for years. So I might look at saints, married and consecrated, who are known for their mothering spirit. Because that's one of the things I see in my daughter. It's not just that I know she wants to be a mom, but the way she engages with our family, the way she plays on her own, she has a very beautiful, nurturing, motherly spirit. And so she and I, when she hasn't been confirmed yet, and when she goes through confirmation, we might sit down together and look at the different mothers who are saints, or the different saints who are known for their nurturing spirit. So I would encourage you to look at the saints and go a little bit deeper than just birthday or occupation. Look at personality, look at calling, look at story. Look at those deeper, richer, more meaningful things, because if you'll do that, you're more likely to connect with your patron saint and form the bond of brotherhood or sisterhood that the patron saints are really supposed to have with us. St. Patrick is my brother. Like, there is no spiritual brother closer to me than St. Patrick. I love him to pieces, and I know in my spirit that he loves me and that he's praying for me every day. You know, one of the reasons that I picked St. Patrick as my patron saint is because, and I can't wait to do a whole video about his life. But St. Patrick was called to take the light of Christ into one of the darkest, most pagan times of Irish history that we have on record. It was truly dark and truly ugly. And he did that with great passion and great determination. And when I was coming into the church, I was still really wrestling with my calling as a person of faith in public education. Because public education is a dark, difficult, pagan arena. And I needed a patron saint that understood what it meant to bring light into the darkness. So that's part of the reason that I asked St. Patrick to be my patron saint. So the last part of all of this is, here's what I would recommend to you. Make a list. all the different saints that you think you might connect with on that deeper, more rich level. Make a list, narrow it down to 3 or 4. And once you've narrowed it down to 3 or 4, then what I would encourage you to do is sit down and in prayer, ask each of those saints if they will be, and if they want to be your patron saint. And then go where the peace is. It's one of my favorite answers to how do I know the right answer, right? When you're in prayer and you're trying to make a choice, how do you know which is the right choice? You go where the peace is. Because where there is peace, there is God. It is one of the fruits of the Spirit that God gives, and it's peace. And so where does your heart lean in a peaceful way when you're considering your patron saint? Because that's probably your answer. And then rejoice, because you have with you a guide and a brother or a sister that is going to walk life with you until you pass through the veil into the kingdom of heaven, and you get to see them face to face and give them a big old giant bear hug. I cannot wait for that day. I cannot wait for that day when I get to step into the kingdom of heaven and first hug Jesus. That's my, like, everything. That's my only desire. Of all the things in my life, that's my one. When I die, I want to hug Christ. And if that's the only thing that happens in heaven, I'm good. After that, I want to hug St. Patrick, because he has been interceding for me probably longer than I know. And I love him to pieces. I cannot wait for that day. I'm not in a hurry to die, let me be clear. But I'm looking forward to when that day happens. So that's what I would do. Make out a list, see which saints you connect with, and then ask each of them if they will intercede for you, and if they want to be your patron saint, and go where the peace is. And then run with it. Run with it with great joy. Because being Catholic, if nothing else, is a joy. It's hard, sure. But it is a joy. It is a difficulty born in joy. So yeah, those are my thoughts. That's what I would encourage you to do. You know, if you're coming into the church, if you're watching this and you're about to go through confirmation, or you're coming into the church at Easter Vigil, I hope this helps you choose your patron saint. I have found tremendous blessings in the church because of St. Patrick. He is my dearest brother. So I hope that helps you. I hope that, if you're raising up some beautiful children and you need to help them find their patron saint, I hope this helps you too. That's all I have for you today. Please like, subscribe, do all the things that help this channel grow, all the algorithm things. Do that. Be a part of this beautiful community that's forming. And until I see you next time, keep climbing.